I don't have any fancy slides, so you're going to have to look at me. But not only me, because I'm going to have my team up here in a moment. I'm going to split my little talk into 3 sections. What has happened since June 2017? I'm going to challenge the audience on a few issues regarding invasive plant management, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about biomass and carbon. So 2017, I'll start at home. It was about 5:30 in the morning. Kids had been told stay home because it's going to rain. Well, it didn't rain. My children were both at home. It was howling. I lived in Barrington at the time, and when I went out the back door, there was a lot of smoke as the sun was rising. So I jumped in the bakkie, I drove down the road, and I thought, holy cow, these are insane conditions, and it didn't stop for 10 days. Where I live was where the fire started, and we didn't even know that morning. We didn't know if we were coming or going. There was no cell phone, there was no telecom. If Rob Dormel, who I was working with on fire suppression, he would say, if I hoot, come outside, because there was no other way to get hold of us. So he would hoot 4 a.m. in the morning, and we'd go, and we'd go, and we'd go. We had no idea that this fire was even in Knysna. So it was only 3 days later, no sleep, that we realized that this fire was completely catastrophic. And at that stage, I was looking at starting work, I think it was on the 12th. So I arrived at work. There was no parking in the basement because the basement was full of secondhand clothing, mattresses, water wheelie bins. I didn't even know that we had an underground parking. I was still picking the ash and the soot out of my ears. Some of the buildings were not able to be occupied, and my job was to manage the environment of Knysna, which had all just burnt down. So it was quite an intimidating start to my career as a civil servant. But you know what? We got stuck in immediately, and I've given so many presentations on the stuff that we were faced with in those first weeks. For those of you who can remember, everything burnt, and then it rained. And what happens when you've got exposed soil and heavy rain? And our topography means that it all just came down the mountain. So we got erosion blankets, we got erosion sausages. We called them the kombarsies and the worsies because they looked like big sausages on the landscape, and blankets. But it felt as though in those first weeks that nothing was enough. I remember Mr. Moon in Brenton Lake calling me and saying, "My dear," he said, "I opened the back door and I was swept through the house and out the front door in a mudslide. Please, can you help?" So these are the kinds of things we dealt with. And as you know, a lot of the reason for the devastation was invasive alien plants. So fortunately, that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 25, 30 years. So we kind of jumped into action. We realized that landowners, farmers, residents were completely devastated, psychologically, often financially, and that we could not come at them with NEMBA. We knew it was coming because after the fire, you get regrowth. But we couldn't come with a sledgehammer and say, you need to, you have to, you must. So we launched a series of workshops with landowners. We went through all of the neighborhoods, or the kind of wards in Knysna with the National Department and province. And we basically said, how can we help? What can we do to assist you to recover from this devastation? Bearing in mind that if you don't take action now, there is this thing called NEMBA, and we will enforce it. So we started a herbicide assistance program with the help of Wessel and Jacobus Vos. We basically filled our containers with herbicide, and anybody who needed herbicide, and we still offer that assistance, we said to them, right, this is the application procedure. if I knew what Debbie had told me now, I would have been a little more circumspect about the herbicides that we issued. But we basically were there to assist. We followed that up 2 years later with an enforcement operation. Lebo, who spoke earlier about the success cases, has been a big part of those enforcement operations. Basically saying to landowners, we've assisted, we've given you advice, we've given you technical advice, how to draft an invasive plant control plan. If you still haven't done anything, we're going to throw the book at you. And I actually think that process has been fairly successful till now. You know, in areas where maybe there's 4 or 5 really, really badly infested plots that pose a significant fire risk, a biodiversity risk, and even a stream flow reduction risk, word gets around. You issue the notice, and sometimes even on the same day, the neighbors are phoning saying, please, can you help? So I think there's been a general increase in awareness of invasive plant management. And I like to think that we, as the local authorities, stepped into that gap timeously. One of the other things that we did was a year ago now, a year ago and 1 month, is we submitted a massive funding proposal to the National Department. So Michael, if you're still here and awake, and Vessel, please bump us to the top of the list, because this is the first year that I have no operational teams. In other words, I have no teams that report directly to me or my department, and I'm bereft, because that's what kind of keeps life interesting, is when you have contractors in field and you have teams doing the clearing, and we're waiting for that funding from national government. It's on a 3-year cycle, and it's a massive capacity building and training initiative. It's nothing in comparison to what Carlo just described. I'm not that ambitious. Our municipal area is a lot smaller than the Garden Route National Park, so but it still requires huge training and capacity building, and then to deploy those teams into the field, monitor them, make sure that they're doing the work properly, and then when they exit the program, make sure that they have work in the private sector, which is the kind of the long-term goal. So while we've been waiting for a response from National on whether we're going to get this funding, we've actually had an opportunity to kind of stand back. And it's been an interesting process, because we're able to look at the areas that were cleared using conventional methods a little bit more critically, because you're off the treadmill for a while. You're not running just to keep up with the next rotation, the next follow-up, the next training session. You can actually look objectively. And I think we've been doing some things wrong. I started with the Working for Water program 25 years ago. There's so many familiar faces. This is my community. This is where I belong. But I'm beginning to be a little bit critical of how we've operated. And some of you, hoekom lag jy? Hoekom lag jy? So there's a Professor Brian van Wilgen, and I used to get so cross with him because he was so critical of the Working for Water program. And I'm a yellow person. Yellow is, what I wear. But he's right. And I've come to the conclusion that our wholesale invasive plant management approach is not actually the way to go. And somebody raised it earlier, what is the restoration outcome? When we clear, what is the biodiversity return that we're getting? And I'm not seeing it. What I see more often than not, and I'm not talking about a little bit of pine, a little bit of hackea in the mountain catchment areas, I'm talking about very, very dense black wattle, eucalyptus, blackwood infestations, is that we take everything out. And what are we left with? Bare soil. Then we have to deal with the marriage to follow up. We've got to deal with weed succession. So it might not be black wood or black wattle that comes back. It might be something else. Our teams don't recognize the weeds that succeed the original weeds, so they don't treat them. And if you're not on your game, you don't even recognize them. I often still, after 25 years, I have to go to Leslie Henderson and have a look. What am I actually looking at here? It's behaving in a really weedy fashion, but I've never seen it before. So the challenge that I'm asking the audience today is, what are our conservation clearing methods that we're going to take with us into the next generation that give us a biodiversity return? So think about that for a second, because I want to hear. I mean, I have my own ideas. That's why I asked about the pH of the soil with regard to not using a herbicide on species like blackwood and black wattle. Is there some way that we can increase the pH of the soil where we don't have to use a herbicide, but we can cut these trees and they don't coppice? And then we can start to cut selectively. So just park that thought and think about how your experiences with clearing and where you've maybe had a nice biodiversity rehabilitation outcome. But I think if I want to change gears quickly, and we haven't really spoken much about biomass or carbon sequestration, the other opportunity we had during this kind of downtime was to say, well, what are the other driving forces for clearing? Historically, with the Working for Water program, it was originally, way back when, it was hectares. We were all pushing for hectares cleared. Then it became person days of employment, and the hectares became less important. More important for us as catchment managers and people interested in getting invasive aliens under control, but actually we had to report on person days. Now we're thinking more in terms of a biomass economy. What is a compelling reason now to clear? Is it because mulch is valuable? Can we turn mulch into biochar, charcoal, wood vinegar, any number of products that actually add value to the soil, add value to a farmer's agricultural endeavors? So now you've got a different dynamic. Now suddenly the biomass has a value. And I can tell you now, there are a lot of farmers out there that have been assisted by, for instance, the National Working for Water program or various donors who lost their biomass. And remember, that's a net removal from the system. They lost it because it was burnt. They lost it because it was trucked away and given to somebody else. It was chipped and removed. And that net removal has an impact on the soil. So biomass is suddenly having a value, and farmers don't want to get rid of it. They want to keep it. They want to use it for their own agricultural purposes, or even just for beautification or for weed suppression. That value has the potential to turn invasive alien plant management around completely. The challenge is that it maintains or sustains this extractive approach to invasive plant management. And we cannot continue with an extractive approach for the reasons I just gave you. It has to be a regenerative approach. So how do we balance that? How do we use this economic pull that adds value to the biomass? How do we combine that with a clearing protocol that sustains the soil and assists in our biodiversity long term? These are not questions that I can answer. I'm putting them out there. I have some ideas, and I think that academically we beautifully positioned here with Sarsveld on our doorstep, that these questions can actually be answered. But I'm going to turn things around now because I'm throwing a lot of questions out there. Instead of waiting to the end to hear what you have to say, can I ask them to answer me now?
To clear in blocks would be a good thing, not to create too much bare soil at one time. Like you do a sort of chessboard effect, and that way what's left behind also gives shelter and for the other stuff to raise to the top, hopefully indigenous stuff. And then when that gets to a certain point, then cut the other blocks.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. I think, that's what I was going to suggest too, like selective clearing. And I went into an area recently in Elandskraal, a part of the Barrington Elandskraal area that didn't burn, and it was mixed eucalyptus black wattle. And the more we walked, the more we kind of changed our minds about how we would do this. But we ended up with that kind of scenario where you take the small stuff, You put it down, you create a bed against the soil, which is very fragile. If you do need machineries for the big stuff, it comes in on that bed so you're not disturbing the soil. You selectively take out some of the big ones. But remember, that's not serving your biomass economy, so it's a compromise. Again, you're only going to be able to extract a certain amount of biomass if you want to add value to it and sell it to subsidize your clearing operation. And this is a hard sell for landowners. But that, I think that's a really good suggestion.
Over here.
My name is Machtel and I'm from Wilderness Heights. I've got Mac here with me and he is helping us on the property. What we do, we cut down, we pull out the little ones as well as they reseed, but replant. I've got a lot of little trees sprouting wherever I don't need them. So we take them out and then we go and put them back. Eventually, with a little bit of mulch around it, we find a new tree. We just make sure that the aliens don't kill them.
That is the perfect solution. Brian van Wilgen always said, you know, he was critical about the way that we did things in the Working for Water program, but he never ever came up with a solution. And what this lady has said now is absolutely spot on. We are wholesale removing. How many Working for Water programs do you know that actively plant, that propagate and plant? I'm not talking about landscape level thousands and thousands of hectares. I'm talking about the usual 10, 15, 20 hectare areas. Why aren't we planting? Melissa, that's what Melissa does for a living. You know, they go and they plant trees.
Especially to look at pioneering indigenous species which can grow faster than the seed that's still in the soil. That might be something to look at going forward. Yeah, we know what they are. They're easy enough.
I don't think you can generalize. Every site is different. Every site has got its own nuances. Some sites have been invaded for 20 years. It's quite different to a site that's only been invaded for 5 years or 10 years. You know, some areas are north-facing, some slopes are south-facing. I mean, all these things play a role in terms of how you're going to manage the invasive species in the first place and what you're going to do in terms of restoration. And I think we're looking for these general rules that I don't think you can apply across the landscape because every place is unique. And this is what I've found. Some places I clear the whole stand of wattle. Sometimes I leave some wattle standing. Sometimes I do no restoration at all, and the native species come back like you can't believe. You know, so every site is unique, and I don't think we can stand anywhere and say this is the way it should be done.
We've chucked the rule book out a long time ago because Arnie's 100% right. You've got to be site specific, but there are principles. And I think that we've actually been guided by the wrong principles for the last 20 years. That the net removal needs to be balanced with a reinstatement or a recovery or a rehabilitation. I hate all of those cliched terms, but we need to be putting things back when we take out. That's the way systems work. So it's not a rule, it's a principle.
I wanted to mention, you know, a site that I'm aware of near Swartvlei that had several hundred hectares under historical forestry, which have recently been converted to pasture for dairy farming. And I was surprised to learn that the entire clearance of that forestry, historic eucalyptus and pine, was done free of charge. And I asked how this happened, and it was the contractor was actually shipping all of that wood to Cape Town, where it was being put on a ship and sent to China. So it's an amazing concept to think that in terms of the carbon loss and carbon footprint, you know, you're shipping carbon out of the country, a far way across the ocean, spending more carbon, and we're not retaining that carbon in our soil. Those trees were also removed with heavy machinery, so it was stumps and all. So, I mean, I think Arne is quite correct that, you know, we've got to take an adaptive management approach and a situation-specific approach. This is just my second point. You know, I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all when it comes to, you know, alien management. If you're going to clear alien vegetation for pasture or for farming, then you do need to get rid of stumps, unfortunately. But if you're just trying to go for restoration and biodiversity enhancement and protection, then by all means, you know, what my approach is, if we've got large trees, I'd prefer to ring bark them and let them die. Preserve the shade, don't disturb the soil, retain the carbon in the soil. And, I think we sometimes underestimate the biodiversity that is associated even with heavily invaded areas. I've driven into places that are pretty much 100% wattle and seen Narina trogon birds flying in front of me. And there's owls nesting on the ground. So, that is why NEMA also protects areas that are heavily invaded if they haven't been disturbed for 10 years, because wildlife does move into these areas. So we do still need to treat them sensitively when working in them. But in many cases, I've found, especially working with watercourses in this area, that it's almost less is more. There's, I've seen many examples where there's a remarkable ability for the natural vegetation to actually recover. It's just about taking things out. So in many respects, just the active removal and clearance and management of aliens just creates the space for the indigenous vegetation to come back fairly passively, with minimal interference. It's only where, like Arne says, a place has been burned repeatedly over years and it's, got a major, major infestation problem for decades that you really have your work cut out for you.
With the replace, maybe we should just maybe also look at the composition of the soil before we replace anything else. So maybe putting soil nutritional back in to replace the microbes and the nematodes and everything, so we can get the condition of the soil back to what it was, or as close to what it was back, and then maybe can't speak English anymore. Maybe the replacement of the indigenous vegetation will happen naturally if we can actually replace the composition of the soils properly. So then we don't have to go and replant. So just to take it back to step one, which is get the soil right, get the nematodes, get all the goetertjies, all the insects and whatever in the soil right, then we wouldn't have to go and put trees and everything else back in. Thanks.
What we noticed as crew, because we would go into the plantation areas after the fire. So the plantations were planted in fynbos, what was traditionally fynbos, because to take out a full forest and replace it with a plantation would be hard work. So that's a fire-prone landscape. It was a fynbos landscape. We found that the succession existed. New things came in despite the pines and the gums. And then, again, one has to be site-specific. It's not always just about planting trees where there's been alien invasive infestations. I spoke about plantations, but there's obviously infestations as well. And then I just wanted to ask, shortly after the fires, there were, I think it's green pop, they had these little bolletjies filled with seeds that they distributed. I was always worried about the genetics of that. Where did those plants come from? There was a big push for planting trees and bringing seeds in. What happened? Was that successful? Was it widespread?
I don't know. I know at Featherbed, Martin Hatchell shot some of the fynbos biochar balls onto the hill, and I don't know how much of them actually germinated in the end. I can't say. I think this idea of soil health is key, because our soils get hammered by a monocrop of invasive alien plants. And if our restoration efforts can be dictated by soil health, we're on the right track. But I do like the vigorous level of debate here, because I have often been quoted as saying, we can't waste our time planting. Clear the aliens, let nature do the rest. And I'm getting to the conclusion where actually, no, clear the aliens and let nature do the rest is not enough.
Everything that we do in alien plant management either links to agriculture, food security, or conservation. And then you can split it up. Conservation, it started with working for water, working for grasslands, working for wetlands, because we realize it's affecting all these sectors. So my stance on this, and I've been fighting, and I'm going to continue. But at least here in Knysna, you're talking my language, on George. The department will agree with me. We have this wonderful organization called SANBI within the department. So you see me wearing SANBI, and now department, because we are one. For a reason, we have units within SANBI: biodiversity conservation and monitoring, infrastructure ecology. Those for me are vital. And SANBI is South African National Biodiversity. So it's accessible, and it should be accessible to everyone who does something that affects biodiversity. I might be wrong, but when I went to school, this is what they taught me, the logic part of it. So I'm saying, before we do clearing, it's either we do it the right way, or we take shortcuts, and we end up with the same problems 20 years later. I've spoken to Dr. Brian. I've even taught him a township handshake. He loves it. But we've both been critical of the system as it is now. And I've been calling for a review and a change to say, let's use other methods. So now my approach is, when we say we're going to clear that area, let's have a pre-ecological assessment that will tell us what indigenous is there, what invasives is there, what kind of soils are we dealing with, the whole thing. And then it will say, after then you do your pre-ecological assessment, that will say, what will you expect in terms of secondary invasion, in terms of natural or indigenous succession that can happen. So ecologists know how to monitor and gauge all of those things. Once we have those two reports, then we will definitely know the approach we need. Either we need to bring in species from outside, or does the pre-ecological assessment say it will be natural selection, so we don't have to touch it for a year or two. Farmers know when they do rotational grazing and stuff. So those reports are vital, but if we don't have them, we're constantly going to be guessing ourselves when we walk in to say, is this the right way, is this the wrong way? Where are those people? Why is people not phoning SANBI, Ecological Infrastructure Unit? Why is nobody phoning Biodiversity Conservation and Monitoring to say, this is what I'm doing? What do you think will happen in the future? Once you have those scientists, because they all have PhDs except for me, but once you have those scientists validate what you want to do, then you've got something to fall back on. And if something changes within the environment and the climate and whatever, they can always come back and say, listen, because of this, let's now do this. Then it's not only your burden, but it's a whole community of people who care about biodiversity. Is that really rocket science? Or is it ecology?
Absolutely brilliant, because it's a multi-faceted approach.
But help me with this, then we can reclaim our land. We can reclaim our water courses. We can reclaim our indigenous species.
There we go. We're all on the same page. That's great. Pam, you wanted to bring your team up.
I did. So I think the best thing that we did since the fires in 2017 was expand the Environmental Management Department. So I'd like to introduce my team to you. If they can just step up here for a moment.
Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Come on. We want to see the Knysna team.
Okay, unfortunately, our token male had to go because a family member tested positive, and I didn't want him infecting all of you.
We don't believe you for a second.
So we do have a male in our team, but I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves to you, give their name, what they studied, what they specialize in, and what their job is at the municipality. And in Molalo's absence, Molalo, bless him, is from Limpopo, so he doesn't speak isiXhosa or Afrikaans, and everybody launches into either of those two languages with him, and he doesn't understand a word. He has been responsible for our climate change risk and vulnerability assessment, which will turn into a climate change adaptation plan. So he's very sharp, young, and lots of enthusiasm, and I'm going to hand over to Nizibone.
Good day, everyone. I am Nizibone Lubisi. I am a student at the University of the Free State doing my honors in geohydrology. I did my undergraduate at the University of the Western Cape doing environmental and water science. I am an intern at the Knysna municipality situated by the Water Research Commission. Thank you.
Well done.
Good day, everyone. I'm Nolu Babalo Lufundo. I did forestry in Nelson Mandela University. I am a project manager at Knysna municipality, more responsible on the alien invasive side, so on the clearing. Thank you so much.
I introduced myself already, but I'll do it again. I'm Kate Southey. I have a master's in zoology, although I'm not a zoologist. My area of expertise, if you want to call them that, is conservation planning and strategic conservation planning.
Great.
I'm very proud of my team, and I think they're amazing. And we have a little green bubble of happiness at Knysna municipality, which I hope to retain. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. That was fantastic. Thank you very much, guys.